Bernadette, can you hear us?
I can, thank you, Councillor Ainsley. Yes.
Thank you, great stuff. Okay, are we recording? Ready to go?
Ready
Good
to go.
evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the meeting of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. We have a busy agenda for tonight's meeting, so turning around to practical matters, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. It's so much easier to manage, particularly if there's a lot of people trying to speak. And please go to mute unless you intend to speak. I'll refer to Jane from governance if I need to record a vote for any procedural matters. So thank you all for that. So moving first to apologies. Do we have any apologies, Jane?
Apologies have been received from Councillor Beggy.
Great, thank you very much indeed. And the next, so that's item 1. The next item is item 2, to confirm the minutes of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee meeting held on the 16th of December and the minutes from the Joint Scrutiny Committee meeting on the 26th of January. I'm going to propose, I'm looking for a proposer for both, if everybody's happy to actually verify both at the same time. So can I have a proposer, please? I saw Councillor Brown's hand up first, and do I have a seconder? Thank you, and that was, I'm so sorry, Councillor Webb, it was Councillor Brown I saw first. And so if we just have a quick vote then, everybody actually proposes the minutes and accepts them. Edward, are you happy to accept the minutes? You're on mute, Edward. You're on mute. Thank you, June, I've got that, thank you. You're still on mute, Councillor Baines.
Councillor Baines, you're still on mute.
I think he's frozen.
I can see his lips moving, so hasn't quite got his volume switch sorted out. Is he trying to tell us he wasn't attending at both meetings and only attended one of them, or? Let's have a quick look. Certainly at the December meeting.
I've now got there, Paul. Sorry, I was trying to unmute on a thing that said unmute, which clearly doesn't mean unmute. But I was not there for the second meeting. I was for the first, but yeah.
Okay, thank you very much indeed then. So I think we've had a unanimous vote for both meetings.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I'm just going to get rid of this. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So that's item 2. Any declarations of interest this evening? Significant pause. Don't see any declarations of interest. So thank you, everybody. We'll move on. Any notice of motions from member, Jane?
We have received no petitions, deputations or questions, and we have received no questions with notice from members.
Okay. And do we have any, do we have any considerations of any matter referred to the committee from a decision in relation to a call-in of a decision?
None received, Chair, and we have received no notices of motion from members.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So we're straight into item 8. So we now have item 8 on the agenda. It's report number 43-2022 from Councillor Wilby, portfolio holder for Education and Children's Services on the development of family hubs and the early help offer. Councillor Wilby, would you like to introduce the report?
So kind of you, Chair. And I will pass straight on to the lovely Bernadette, who has been the editor and designer-in-chief of the Family Hub for us. Let's say that it builds on the good work that we've had going in the Children's Centre, and I think is a wonderful idea. It's exciting. There are lots of things that we can build on it as we go through. It is work in progress, obviously, but I'll leave Bernadette to explain exactly how it works. Bernadette, you have control.
Thank you, Councillor Wilby. Thank you, Chair and Councillors. You've had the report, which contains a lot more detail. So what I'm going to do is just to give you a summary of what's in the report. Jane, do we want to put the presentation on screen? And then I can talk to it. Thank you, Jane. If you don't mind moving down the slides, that would be really helpful. So what I wanted to do was to, okay, thanks, Jane. First slide, please. To give Children's Scrutiny Committee an update and an early sight of the Family Hub programme. It would be good to be able to give you some understanding of what a Family Hub is, what it offers, and as Councillor Wilby said, some of the opportunities that it brings for Rutland, and indeed some of the challenges that we need to know about and consider. I'll update you on progress so far, bearing in mind that we got notice of this programme in December, so it's quite in its early formation. What will be critical to the programme is just to get our partnership engagement and start identifying leads to supporters. So the message being there that this is not a programme that sits entirely with the County Council. I'll talk about some of the next steps we need to take in the very short and longer term, and we'll go from there. Thank you, Jane. I think an important point to share with you is that it's a real opportunity to bring government departments together. So we have some really critical national initiatives, such as the Best Start in Life, 1001 Critical Days, the Supporting Families Programme, which was previously the Troubled Families Programme, and the Reducing Parental Conflict Programme. All of those Rutland County Council are engaged with, and we're delivering on those. So that's sort of a positive opportunity for us to be able to build on those national programs. So we're well.
Can I just come in at this point, if you don't mind, very
Yes,
quickly? I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm really not very familiar with these abbreviations: DHSE, DL, UHC, DWP. Could you expand on that for me, please?
Yes, of course, Councillor Ainsley. I think there's probably more detail in the written report, so my apologies. The DHSE is the Department of Health, the Department of Local Government Housing, which was previously DCLG, and the DWP, the Department of now you're testing.
It's
welfare and
Department of
pensions.
Work and Pensions.
Not welfare.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. So our health, local government and pensions departments. Government have made a commitment to fund the programme, and they identified initially £8 million nationally for the programme. Each local authority has received a small contribution. Rutland County Council, as with all other local authorities, got £40,000, predominantly to put some infrastructure and programme capacity in place, because the intention being that this programme has got to be up and running fairly quickly. There is a national family hub and also a regional lead. So local authorities in our region are all connected into a regional group, and we're getting the strategic oversight from the adult and the directors for children's services and adult services as part of the overall regional improvement and innovation alliance. So that's the group that Dawn and colleagues sit on, and they provide the oversight and direction on the programme. So it's well hooked into both a national infrastructure and a regional infrastructure. But there is an expectation that each local authority will develop a family hub programme. Thanks, Jane. So what are family hubs? The intention being, if the easiest way for me to describe it in terms of what would be familiar to Rutland would be if you imagine taking our children's centre and then taking our youth services and our SEND services and bringing them together and then connecting to some of our wider services, such as library and informations, leisure, and so on. The intention being that it's a system-wide model so that we join up family support services right through from conception into the early years and until young people reach 19 and up to 21 for children with additional needs. It's a mixture of providing support and services in a physical space, but also to develop a virtual offer as well as being able to, some describe it as a hub and spoke model, where we have one hub and then we have an opportunity to reach out to communities. And if you think about Rutland, that might mean reaching some of our smaller, more rural communities, or indeed our service families. Place where families can access easily, and particularly families who are who are vulnerable, and we talk about that in a moment. The intention being that it should feel like a universal way in to get support, and it's often described as being non-stigmatized, but also it's a place where families get everything they need. And an example that's often given is families may get some support, antenatal care, mental health advice. They might be able to register their baby. It's a place for young people to come. It could be a place for training, life skills, or support going back to work. So it's intended to be one place where a range of services are available for families. And I mentioned there the Start for Life, and that's very much a focus, and you'll see that in the more detailed report. The research done about the importance of those first 1001 days for children, and indeed bear in mind and some of the research that's emerging around the impact of COVID on babies. So it's an intention of building on what we know and what we anticipate families may need as a result of COVID pandemic. Thanks, Jane. So what it is, as I've described, there are some, although each local authority will have the option, and each locality, I say locality is probably better than saying each local authority, because it is local authority, it's health, it's the voluntary sector, but there is the opportunity to be able to make that clearly to reflect what are the local needs of Rutland. But there are three clear principles that each area is encouraged to deliver on. And that includes, and there's no surprises here, access, making it simple and an easy way for families to find out about the services, but get them, connecting up professionals. And that may be about professionals having the opportunity to work together, could be professionals working with the voluntary and community sector, in opportunities to be able to be co-located, and then more fundamental things like being able to share data and work to one plan around the family. Again, building on what we would describe in Rutland as our team around the family, one plan, one approach. Also, it's about building on that strengths-based approach, work with families, very similar to what we already work to as a principle in terms of our signs of safety methodology. So building trusted adults for families and working alongside them. The intention being that the support starts early and when families need it. And although it's described as being universal front door, clearly it will focus on those families who are vulnerable, and it describes lower socioeconomic groups, families who have special educational needs or disability, and families who may be experiencing exclusion in their community. Thanks, Jane. So, as Councillor Wilby said, this is a real opportunity to build on what we already have in place or what we've learned so far. Clearly, it's a real opportunity to build on the Children's Centre and Youth Offer. We have a strong early help partnership in Rutland. We work well with our partner colleagues, and it fits in and fits nicely and is timely into some of our current agendas and our future agendas. For example, our Rutland Strategic Children's Plan, the Health and Wellbeing Strategy, it's cited in those documents and in those intentions, and the wider local plan and leisure offer. We want to build on what we've learned from COVID, and that's, families have told us they want that more flexible and accessible offer. They've enjoyed some of the virtual and digital offer, but they also want the opportunity to have face-to-face contact. And they wanted, not in your regular 9 to 5 day, but they want that support available perhaps in the evenings or weekend. So it reflects family life. There's an opportunity for us to build on our successful integrated front door. So that's a real strength for us, where our early help and children's social care work together and are the first point of contact. And we've really worked hard to make sure that we're able to work together to identify need and send families in the right direction and provide the right support for them. So that is ultimately about ensuring that children and families get support early in a timely manner, and that we protect children as well. Again, I've mentioned this already about the early start in life, but certainly supporting children in the early years, so that again, it's the same principle, whether it's early help or early years. We're identifying and meeting needs early and ensuring that we build that resilience really early in families, so that there is less reliance on statutory service, such as social care. We have an opportunity to develop some of our data sharing pathways. We have some of that in place already. The Troubled Families Programme provided that framework for us to share information safely about families, and a way of ensuring the families only had to tell their story once. So if they were coming to the family centre, they would have the opportunity to meet professionals and not have to go somewhere else and tell the story again. And that's often what families tell us. They don't want to have to repeat their story. Opportunity to build on our SEND and inclusion recovery projects. You will be aware from our last committee that we gave an update on the SEND and recovery plan. So there's a real chance to grow what we've started there and to build on our early years pathway and community provision, the work we're doing with our early years settings. This is one-off funding. We've utilised it already to put some project management capacity in place, and we're hooked in to the regional support. We meet on a monthly basis to understand what other local authorities are doing, to share learning, to share approaches. So that's proving really, really popular as a support network, and to get the projects off the ground, so we're not all having to reinvent the wheel. Thank you, Jane. There will be some challenges, and I think it's one that we all recognise is the capacity, particularly in partnership services and in particular in health, being able to engage and get commitment from some of our partner agencies at a time when they are dealing with other priorities. So that will be something so the engagement plan will be an important element for us to get that commitment from key partners. Suitable physical spaces, the intention being that we have an offer that crosses all age, but that brings with it the opportunity to sort of co-locate staff. Might be our children's centre youth services staff working with our health visitors or our health and well-being workers. But it will be a challenge that we have sufficient space. And what young people tell us at the moment, whilst we've got a lovely children's centre space, our young people don't particularly want to be in an early years setting when they're having their group work. So it's thinking about how we might effectively use existing spaces to be able to work together and co-locate and actually physically have a family hub presence. Data sharing agreements, sharing case management systems is complex. The local authority will have different case management systems and information systems compared to health. And we're constantly involved, and we are gaining some traction there in terms of some of the work that's happening across Leicestershire, Leicester City and Rutland in terms of taking a more pragmatic approach. And I certainly think COVID has helped us with that, to be able to find common sense ways of sharing information that's in the interest of children. But it is a challenge and it takes considerable time. There is no long-term funding for additional personnel or resources being confirmed yet. There is some early indication that government may release further funding. but that's not been confirmed. So whatever model we build on, it'll be critical that it builds on existing resources and that we use them as efficiently as we can. So we'll be looking for opportunities to do that and make sure that it's sustainable in the long term. We've discussed the governance oversight and responsibility for this programme for Rutland, and the obvious choice for the governance to sit would be with our Children and Young People's Partnership. But to some extent, you know, we have a robust and well-functioning children's centre governance group, but that concentrates and the partnership around that is predominantly around children from 0 to 5. So we want to ensure that whatever governance structure we have, that we'll be able to have that oversight across all ages. And we're looking to our Children and Young People's Partnership to provide that governance oversight. Thank you, Jane. So the next steps, we have a very experienced project manager in place. Her name is Janet Dowling, and Janet's already working, meeting people internally. She started in post on the 1st of February, and she's working on a feasibility study. We have to submit that to the region by the end of March, and that just sets out what we see our options. It's high level, what we see our options in terms of what the model will look like. And then really it's getting down to the more detailed work in terms of identifying who would be our really key lead partners to be involved. We want to pull together some sort of steering group so that there's a really clear understanding from the start that it is a shared program. So we can begin to look at and understand the data we have residing in various places. We can pull it together. So whatever we design is going to reflect local needs. It's important in terms of getting that buy-up from senior leaders and partners. So we have taking a report to Cabinet, and we will be taking a report to the Children and Young People's Partnership. And there's various other places that I am presenting on the programme, such as the LLR Children's Design Group. So it's really important that there is an understanding of the programme and a commitment to engage in it. Equally important is engaging with our voluntary and community groups, and especially our children and young people and families. So we were putting in place would be identifying really key people. And already we've had the discussion and presentation at the Children's Centre Governance Group. So we've got people like the VAR attend that, library services, health services, the Leicestershire Partnership, the CCG. So we've already begun that engagement, but I think what we want to do now is think about what that communication plan and that plan will look like, so that children and families feel that they're shaping that as well. And we've got some really good ways of doing that. You know, we've got a vibrant children and youth council, we've got a disabled young people's forum, we've got parent champions that work from the Children's Centre. So we've got some really good places where we have a voice, but we want to make sure that we do that in a deliberate and thoughtful way. One of the things we want to develop is how we get that blended approach right, so that whatever we put in place, some of that may be face-to-face, but also how we develop that digital offer. And not only the Rutland County Council's digital offer, but what health have in place as well. Clearly, we want to show evidence that this programme and way of working is successful. So we'll be developing a performance framework and an evaluation strategy. And I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments you may have. As I say, there's more detail in the report. So that's a very quick, speedy gallop through.
Thank you very much, Bernadette, for your presentation. It was most useful, and now I'd like to open up to the floor for questions. Andrew, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Bernadette. How much sort of officer time do you think this is going to use up? And if it does start using up large amounts of officer time, are we going to have a shortfall elsewhere? And the second question I've got is how are you going to publicise this so people know about it?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Brown. It will require. I mean, I think what we have in place already is staff who see this as being the development work we would be doing anywhere. So our youth services plan, our children's services plan, the work we want to deliver features there. So I'm not anticipating that it will be excessive. I think the biggest demand is having somebody who can pull together the documentation, start some of those key meetings, and our project manager being in post would be really helpful in doing that. So I think a lot of what we want to do will be part of the daily job. So I'm not anticipating that to be an excessive amount of additional work for our officers.
Yeah, can I just add to that? I think that was why we felt it was important to bring in a project manager to have that, to be able to give us that additional capacity into getting this off the ground. And clearly, part of and having somebody whose sole focus is the development of the family hub model and delivering that and being able to really drive it as their kind of main focus, because otherwise it would have been it would have been a much increased workload for staff, and actually probably not something we could have pulled in successfully. So that's why we made that deliberate decision to use that funding, which was given for that purpose. In terms of the communication, I think that's one of the, as Bernadette just said, that's one of the key focuses for the project manager is a communications plan. So once we've got the feasibility study completed, we'll move into kind of thinking about the model, doing the consultation more broadly and a proper communications plan, because we're very, very keen, as Bernadette said, that this is co-produced with parents and children and young people as far as possible, that it isn't just something that we kind of put a model out and say, what do you think? That actually we really do some engagement with them to listen to what they're saying they need.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Does that answer your question? And Councillor Brown, thank you very much indeed. The next hand I saw up was Councillor Sue Webb. So, and then I'll come to you, Edward. So if you just so Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it might be early days, but have you got a particular location in mind? Existing building, or I noticed in the report on the paperwork there's mention of outreach places as well. Just wondering how far you've got really with that.
Well, but there's two things happening. Obviously, the feasibility study is happening, and that will cover the space element of the programme. You'll also be aware that more broadly there's a corporate asset review happening, and so we do need to kind of dovetail in with the corporate asset review as well, because there's no point us going off in one direction and the corporate asset review taking us in another. So we're having to dovetail in, and that will help us form our thinking more definitively about the space, if you like. We have mentioned the Children's Centre. It is a small space and it is very well used already. That being said, there may be an opportunity to think about how we use the library space more effectively when we're thinking about that kind of broader offer to the adults in families as much as the children and young people in families. So, we have started the thinking, and certainly our project manager has already made links both with Robert Clayton and Roger Ranson in relation to the local plan as well. So we have started that, but we're not in a position to give you any definitive answer tonight.
No, I wasn't expecting. Yeah. I just wondered how far it had gone, and obviously with the changing, as you say, with the corporate side of things.
Yeah.
Could we,
And it may be that actually there isn't just one space, and I
Yeah.
think that's the other bit. It's not necessarily we're thinking much broader about accessibility across the county as
Yes.
opposed to Oakham as an example.
yes.
Yeah.
Because that's where I was leading to in a way that how are people actually going to get there? But I'm probably too far ahead down the line.
No, I mean, no, it's a good question. And I think, I know certainly another suggestion has been around, there's a number of different sports clubs, for example, throughout Rutland, who have buildings, spaces. So it's how do we link with those facilities? So these are all things that are in the mix. If we just haven't firmed it all up yet.
Okay,
And
thank you.
we have opportunities to build on what we have already in terms of our outreach. So we are already delivering services at the barracks in the community space
Yes,
there,
yeah.
for example. We're working with Uppingham Town Council. They're delivering some youth work now as a community, which is great. And we're working closely with the Voluntary Action Rutland. They have spaces, community spaces we have the opportunity to use and are using, and also as part of the health and wellbeing strategy, we're looking at the place planning and the opportunities that perhaps there may be at RMH, the hospital side. So yeah, we're connecting into some of those other existing outreach locations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Webb, is that happy with that?
Yes, thank you very
Okay.
much.
Does anybody else want to come in? If not, I want to. Sorry, Edward. I think.
That's all right, Chairman. Thank you. I welcome this because I think it's an integrated approach, and those of us who've been involved with the task and finish group on the primary care, it seems to fit very well with this. But I would just like to ask a question on the 40k one-off grant. I don't think any of the officers were present at when Rutland rather got his fingers burned a few years back, because what looked like a very attractive government grant hadn't got any ongoing provision. So Rutland, this was on nursery schools, early years, and Rutland duly appointed 3 people, which were funded by that. And then when the funding ran out, there was an unfortunate situation of Rutland being responsible for redundancy, and the budget hadn't really anticipated this removal of funding. All I really wanted was assurance about the nature of the contract for your project manager. I think I understood that correctly on the first bit. And going forward, because I think the worst possible thing is if you can get something that meets local needs, is really appreciated, and then it comes under threat financially. And so really, Chairman, I was looking for assurance that we've got financial sustainability worked in as far as we could. Thank you.
So on the first bit, our project manager is on a 12-month fixed contract, and we've worked out the length of the contract that would match the amount of funding we've been given. So just to reassure you on that point. In terms of the sustainability of the whole Family Hub programme, we are working on the premise that we're not going to get any recurring funding. So everything that we're going to be modelling is based on our current resources, and so because that's the only way we can assure ourselves that it would be sustainable. Now, obviously, if in the future the government decide to announce a further round of funding, that's brilliant, and we will happily take that. But the whole plan is being drawn up on the premise that there is no additional funding ongoing. So it's much more about redesigning what we've got in a way, which will make it sustainable, as opposed to relying on new funding coming through.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair, and that answers both of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any other questions from the floor? Okay, I'd like to, if I may, just say a few words, and that I really welcome the hub and spoke approach. I think a central hub in the rural community is a little bit of a nonsense, really, particularly when in Rutland. So I really welcome that approach. And I was really asking whether the delivery plan and engagement plan would be giving due consideration to prioritising wards such as Uppingham Eastern and Oakham, Uppingham Eastern, Uppingham West and Oakham Centre, who have their own particular problems. And I'm hoping you'll be considering making best use of our town and parish community facilities. I'm slightly worried about cost and budget in all of this, because if we have a good spoke model from a central hub, I think it's going to take some careful budgetary considerations if it's going to be sustainable. And I was wondering whether perhaps we could bus families in rather than go to them. So I think I'm sure that'll all be considered within the plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really helpful. I mean, the feedback back that we're getting from you this evening will feed into the feasibility study, because I think some of the points that you make, particularly around particular wards, is something that we can certainly should be picking up as part of the feasibility study and the kind of model planning. And again, the accessibility in terms of, you know, where services are going to be delivered from in that hub and spoke model. Again, that will form part of the feasibility study, and the kind of more, I mean, the feasibility study is high level, so it's more likely that the feasibility study will probably have recommendations for the areas such as that will require more work, which is fine. That's why we've got a 12-month project manager on board to take that forward. But yeah, that it's very helpful, kind of those comments.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. The second thing I wanted to mention, if I may, is that this is a great opportunity to join in with so many other initiatives that are happening, and I'm thinking in particular of the Rutland place-based plan. You know, it's got a priority that says we want, an obvious example being the priority theme, the best start in life. And we are concerned about families on low incomes, family with SEND children, and a whole host of other families that may not be as well connected as perhaps they should be. So how closely do you think that you will be working with the Health and Wellbeing Board on this?
Absolutely. So yesterday was actually, there was a special, you were there, Paul,
the
special Health and Wellbeing Board. So the delivery plan, which sits alongside the Health and Wellbeing place-based plan strategy. The family hub model forms features within that delivery plan. Actually, I think going back to that kind of sustainability and the budget question, I think that's given us a really good opportunity to get health at the table around this. So one of the other priorities within the health and wellbeing strategy is around mental health, and that's a cross-cutting theme that cuts across various priorities. And actually one of the things that we talked about yesterday in the Health and Wellbeing Board was really about the mental health transformation, having a place-based delivery group and involving children and young people in that. But also there is funding, and I think the advert is going out for this very shortly, for a neighbourhood mental health lead post, which again we will be plugging into the family hub model too. So, but I think by the very fact that we've specified the family hub model within the delivery plan of the joint and health and wellbeing strategy, allows us to have greater access and push at a slightly ajar door in terms of getting potentially some funding through CCG.
Yeah, I think it's the ongoing budget, isn't it? I think that's the problem
Yeah.
here. I think the initiative is absolutely wonderful. I think that the intentions are wonderful. But I, being a cynic and of a certain age, I have seen too many failed initiatives who have the same, it's very similar. I'm thinking of Sure Start and things like that, and I'm hoping that this is a fresh start, and I feel certain that we can make good use of all the initiatives that are currently going, because there's an awful lot of change happening elsewhere. So thank you. Does anybody want to come back before we just go and have a quick vote on this? No. Bernadette, is there anything you want to say at this point, or are you just quite happy for us to push on?
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. That was a really helpful conversation. I've made note of some of the things you've mentioned. And as Dawn said, we will be considering those in the feasibility study and then the future delivery plan. So thank you for that.
So you may be talking yourselves to be invited back. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
We would welcome that.
Yes,
Of course you would. Thank you. Thank you. So let's move on to the decisions and recommendations. We're being asked to note the developments of a national and local family hub programme, and that the committee endorses the opportunities the family hub provides to build upon our existing services in Rutland. I'm guessing that would you raise your hand whether you support that and endorse the actual recommendations, please. Thank you very much indeed. That looks like thank you, Jane. She captured that. Good stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Bernadette. I don't know whether Bernadette can be excused now, or do you need for later for the next topic?
No, Bernadette is, if you're happy for her to get on with the rest of her evening, then she can feel free to stay, but she can feel free to leave as well.
I'm sure you'd like some of your evening back, Bernadette, but thank you very much indeed. And by all means, stay if you wish.
Thanks,
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor.
So, Dawn, you're going to be on your own. So, well, of course, I keep forgetting.
I've got
David.
Councillor Wilby.
Of course you have, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the next item, which is the domestic abuse strategy. Item 9, report 44, 2022. And again, from Councillor Wilby, portfolio holder for Education and Children's Service, giving us an update on a domestic abuse strategy. Councillor Wilby, would you like to introduce the report?
Before I do, while I've got the mic, I'd just like to round up that last conversation, because I really am very enthused by the opportunity that the Families Hub gives us. I've sat in during the pandemic on all sorts of committees and things like that, and what I've seen is a lot of working together, good partnership, transfer of information and enthusiasm. And I think if we can hit the floor running on the Family Hub and use the opportunity to link so many of our systems, and that's, you know, by having that you know, project manager in to start off with, who I understand is very experienced, it will give us a chance, if we look positively, to try and get the best things forward. And I think as we come through the year, we may find that we're actually doing things more efficiently, smarter, and by signposting well and getting our communication right, we might actually ease our problems right the way across the board. So I think that's really, really good. And I know that in Bernadette and Dawn, we've got the people who will drive it forward. We move on to the domestic abuse strategy, and Dawn has been doing great work in this with East Midlands colleagues, and I'll leave her to do the professional stuff here, if you will, please, Dawn.
Thank you, David. Yeah, so the report in front of you, it's twofold, really. It's giving you some information about the Domestic Abuse Act, and I'll talk a bit about what that is, what it means for us. But also Appendix A, you'll see that there is a domestic abuse strategy appended, and obviously welcome comments on that too. So in terms of our domestic abuse strategy, back in, it's nearly a year ago, back in April 2021, the government announced, or it got Royal Assent Domestic Abuse Act 2021, which basically it came into force in October 21, and really it was to promote and strengthen the existing legislation around domestic abuse, particularly with a focus on strengthening the support for victims of abuse. It's not just, the Act doesn't just put duties on local authorities, they're wider ranging than that, but the ones that I'm going to focus on that are key for us as a local authority, there's a couple of things. So in terms of the Act itself, it places a duty on local authorities to provide accommodation-based support to victims of domestic abuse and their children in refuges and other safe accommodation. So that's an actual duty now that's been placed on local authorities. Really interestingly and welcome is that children are now seen as victims of domestic abuse in their own right. So prior to this Act coming into force, we would describe children as as an example, if there was domestic abuse incident happening in the home and the children are upstairs in bed, they might be described as witnessing at most domestic abuse, when actually this Act very clearly says they are also victims of abuse. And that's really important in terms of recognising the impact of domestic abuse on children. There's other duties around the kind of governance and awareness raising of domestic abuse in our communities. One of the main governance implications of the Act is that there should be a domestic abuse local partnership board. It's a new board that's been introduced by this Act. What that really means is that there should be in every local authority a domestic abuse multi-agency partnership board that really champions the rights of victims and the need for good and ensuring that there's good support services for all victims of domestic abuse. Now, in terms of how we've approached, how we've got two elements of funding. So the first bit of funding that we were given last summer was to basically do a needs assessment of, you know, looking at what we currently have in Rutland and where the gaps are, and then to help us develop our strategy to address those. You'll see in the report that we commissioned Safe Lives to do our needs assessment for us. They're a really well respected, they're a leading national organisation in relation to domestic abuse, and so we commissioned them to do a local strategic needs assessment for us that would then go on to inform our strategy. I'm not going to go through all of the findings because clearly you've got those in detail in terms of the report. What I would say is in Rutland there has been we have fairly low numbers in relation to incidents of domestic abuse. One of the things that the needs assessment highlighted is that there may be underreporting, which would make sense, but actually in terms of and so therefore that there may be some hidden victims in Rutland that we just don't know about at the moment. So one of the priorities that you'll see in terms of our strategy is around thinking about a whilst there has been awareness raising campaigns, is really thinking about maybe doing a bit more targeted campaigning, and thinking about actually what's going to really reach some of our harder to reach communities and people within our communities. So that's one area. The other area, which is one of the biggest parts of the Act, is around the safe accommodation provision. So in Rutland, we have, what was found is actually that we do meet the recommended level of safe accommodation spaces, which is recommended through Women's Aid. What you will see, though, later on in the report is, whilst we have the right number, they might not be the right spaces for people with particular characteristics. So I'm thinking people potentially with learning difficulties or that sort of additional need or disability, and older people as well. So that is something we still need to kind of, whilst the number itself, yes, we've got the sufficient spaces, it's actually about making sure that the spaces that we have in Rutland actually are able to be accessible to the people who need them the most. In terms of the Domestic Abuse Local Partnership Board, we already have, as you'll be aware, the Safer Rutland Partnership, and all the people who sit in on the Safer Rutland Partnership are the same partners who would also be required to sit on the Domestic Abuse Local Partnership Board. So we've made a decision in Rutland that instead of setting up a whole new board, we have changed the terms of reference of the Safer Rutland Partnership, so that the Safer Rutland Partnership does its Safer Rutland Partnership business. Domestic abuse is already one of the Safer Rutland Partnership's priorities, but then also we piggyback on the back of that. So we also sit as a domestic abuse partnership board too, and domestic abuse is a standing agenda item, and the domestic abuse strategy sits as a standing agenda as part of that. It makes sense because, as I say, it's a good use of people's time, and it's, as I said, it's the same people who are around around the same table. Where we do need to do some more development, though, is there is a requirement that the voice of survivors is on the Domestic Abuse Partnership Board. So we are working with UAVA, who are the umbrella organisation in terms of domestic abuse support services, to ensure that we do have a survivor voice represented on that board. So that's a piece of work that we're taking forward to ensure that we're fully compliant with the Act. A little bit around in terms of the governance that sits behind underneath the board level. We do have a Rutland Domestic Abuse Working Group. So that's a smaller group that Emma Sweeney heads up, who's the head of service for social care, and includes our adult colleagues as well as community safety and other partners, just for Rutland. So that they're the kind of operational group, really. And then there is also a number of sub-regional groups across Leicestershire City and Rutland, one of which is the Domestic Abuse Task and Finish Group, because we do work very much as a sub-region on issues of domestic abuse, obviously because our police health footprints are shared across, so it makes sense that we work across the region, sub-region, with in terms of domestic abuse. That's really important when we think about the commissioned specialist domestic abuse support services that we have in Rutland. We wouldn't we've got a wide range of commissioned specialist domestic abuse support. We wouldn't have that range of support if we were trying to commission it on our own. It is very much strength in numbers. So it was at these domestic abuse support services were actually recommissioned last year, beginning of last year, and they basically, there's kind of several elements to it. The main access point is the help and engagement service, and then following that we have a locality service in Rutland for domestic violence and abuse. There's also a perpetrator interventions framework that isn't a regular offer. It's something we can spot purchase as and when we need, which works very well for us. And then the other element is accommodation related support services. They are not in Rutland at the moment, but that again is something that we can access through the sub-regional work. So in terms of our domestic abuse priorities that are in the strategy for the next 4 years, is, as I said, it's raising awareness of domestic abuse and its prevalence locally. So part of that is around the awareness raising campaigns, but it's also about training and ensuring professional curiosity. So those professionals that are interacting with adults, that they're exploring issues of domestic abuse or whether there is any hidden harm, so that they have it in their minds. It's not something that they don't think about. And that's to address the potential underreporting that I mentioned earlier. The other priorities around safeguarding clearly people at risk and providing support for victims and survivors. We already have good adult support services, but as I said earlier, now that children are recognised as victims in their own right, that's an area of work we want to strengthen. So we already do individual work with families and children where domestic abuse has been identified as a feature. And a lot of that work's done through the Children's Centre. However, we know that we recognise that that's something that we need to strengthen across all age ranges. The other priorities are about changing behaviours of perpetrators and preventing that reoffending, and that's very much around perpetrator management programmes. And certainly, we work really closely with colleagues across community safety and probation around that, and also. And then the other two priorities are around the having relevant safe accommodation and ensuring that partners are working together to provide that multi-agency response to domestic abuse. Because as I said, whilst we are taking the lead, we've taken the lead in terms of having to have a domestic abuse strategy, and indeed the Act required the local authority to produce a strategy and publish it. It is very much seen as it and recognised that this requires a multi-agency response. It isn't just a council responsibility. So that's been very much how we've built our strategy up. In terms of next steps, I mentioned we've already had one grant, which was about making your organisation ready for the new Act. We have been advised that we're going to be receiving a further £62,000 grant. It isn't actually in the bank account yet, though, but I have had the official letter to say it's coming. But that further £62,000 is to provide support around the delivery, and particularly thinking about safe accommodation. So so that's going to be used in terms of the delivery plan, and we're looking at whether we can do some pool some of our funding across our sub-region, which will allow us to kind of build a better offer rather than just trying to do it ourselves. The grant conditions are very specific. Well, they're specific in one respect, but they're quite flexible in a lot of other ways. But the one thing they are specific on is that local authorities are not able to use the grant funding to purchase a property. I mean, clearly £62,000 in Rutland wouldn't go very far. So we're not, in terms of, we wouldn't be thinking of doing that anyway. But clearly, it's about providing support services. It's not about providing accommodation. So that's the one area of the grant condition that is quite specific. As I said, you've got the strategy appended. This has been through the Safer Rutland partnership already, but I'm very happy to take any questions and any comments.
Thank you very much for that, Dawn. That's a good introduction. So if we go straight to questions, and I can see that Paul Brown has got his hand up. So Councillor Brown, Paul. You're on mute, Councillor Brown.
Am I okay now?
You are.
Yes.
Jolly good. You said that safe accommodation I'm turning to. Am I correct? I think it's that Longhurst have provided 9 units. Yes. From what I see. These are obviously more long-term units. There is various relevances to both sanctuary scheme and refuge accommodation. I presume they're pretty well the same. Presumably they're to deal with the immediate after effects of domestic violence and its repercussions. I'm not sure. Do we have those facilities locally? Because clearly if there's children involved, it's very good for them to continue with their education locally and to keep within their local environments to minimize the stress to them. Do we have those facilities locally, or are we planning to do that? I notice you say the grant's not for that type of situation.
Yeah. We don't have all of those facilities locally, as in within Rutland. One of the difficulty, it's quite a difficult one in terms of, because I agree with you. From my point of view, I would want children to be able to still access, clearly their school and their, support, etc., friends, etc. Within sometimes though, and this is part of how we're trying, how nationally, but equal, and locally, it's about trying to turn it around in terms of domestic abuse, because what happens is often it is the victim who is required to move to the safe space, and they don't want to be in the same town or same area as the perpetrator. And so so that's where the difficulty can be sometimes, in terms of particularly somewhere as small as Rutland. So if you're thinking about Oakham, it's a very small market town, so it's so what we're trying to do is, and that's why we work as within that sub-region. But you're absolutely right. This is one of the considerations that we need to do more work on when I'm talking about that support to children in particular, and actually how we work with our other partners in terms of disrupting the perpetrator as opposed to the victim. But I think that's a longer term piece of work, but it's a very good point.
I can see that you're pulled in 2 ways. One, to protect the victim of the abuse, who doesn't want to be close to the perpetrator, and it's a small area and we all know where everything is, and also the what is in the interest of the children. So it's a difficult dilemma for you.
It's very difficult. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So answer that question. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Brown. Thank you, Dawn. So who's next on the list? I've got Councillor Brown, Andrew Brown.
Thanks, Paul. My question actually has partly been answered because I was going to ask the same sort of thing. What happens if the location of the safe accommodation becomes known to the perpetrator, or I don't know, is revealed on social media or something? Do you have the facility to move the victims elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, there's a range of tactics, actions that are taken. So clearly, the address of safe accommodation is confidential, but like you said, particularly with social media, it's things get known. So the police will put markers on addresses. Often the safe accommodation has what do you call it? I'm going to use the word equipment, which makes it sound a bit basic, but it's not. But it has kind of, you know, things like panic buttons and that sort of thing that's directly linked to the police. So there's a very quick response. Ultimately, though, there are times where a victim would have to move to a different location, and sometimes they make that decision for themselves, and sometimes it's something that's forced upon them, unfortunately, because you know, what I would say, thankfully, you know, we're in Rutland, it's rare that it gets to that level of intervention and risk. But having said that, there is a lot of tactics and that the police, and we work with the police and community safety, and if there's children involved, children's services work really well and really closely together in terms of that response. But yeah, it's always very difficult with that dilemma of kind of, particularly if you actually haven't got a criminal conviction, because often before, you know, it may be that a victim is reporting domestic abuse, but they don't want to take it through a criminal justice route, but still they do require support as a victim of domestic abuse, and then that becomes more difficult.
Okay, Councillor Brown, Andrew, does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, are there any more questions? If not, I'd like to. Oh,
just
Brown,
one more I want to ask.
Sorry, Councillor Webb, get you just next. No, go on, Councillor Brown.
I bow to Councillor Webb first.
Okay, how gentlemanly. So, Councillor Webb.
Thank you. There was no need to do that. I just wanted to say that I welcome the children being included as victims. That's long awaited, really.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think it is long awaited, and I think it's really valuable that we've got that as one of our one of the priorities, not just in the domestic abuse strategy, but actually we'd already put it as a priority in our children's and young people's partnership plan as well. So it's all dovetailing nicely together. But yeah, it's been really important for children to have that recognition.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. And Councillor Paul Brown this time.
Yes, yes, one quick question. The new domestic abuse protection notice and the new domestic abuse orders, are they judicial, or do you have to go through court to get those?
You do have to. They are you do have to go through court. It'd be an application court. It wouldn't be a it's not a criminal justice, it wouldn't be a crime court, it would be a private
county court.
Yeah.
County court, family court. Okay, so it's still got to go through the system. That's what I was.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there is a there is a legal process that still has to go through. Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Brown?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So if everybody's okay, I'd like to ask a few questions myself, if I may. One of the things that really, along with Councillor Webb, I really do, I'm excited to hear that children are now recognised within domestic abuse as victims. I think that's long overdue. And I noticed that in the Strengthening Children's Social Care, that the area of focus in relation to the new duties is to ensure that we strengthen our offer to children, ensure they have access to support services specific to domestic abuse links, and then it links on to priorities 2, 4, and 5. One of the things that I do, I've probably said this endlessly before, but I do a lot of work for youth justice system, and frequently, and I recently in the last few years did some ACEs training, and what I found fascinating was that that when children experience abuse, and it doesn't have to be physical, it can just be listening to parents or carers hurling abuse at each other, and any form of coercion, these experiences mount up and lead to actual future physical and mental health issues, and also disattachment, they become disattached from any kind of relationship. So I think ACEs, to me at least, was actually very valuable. Do we give ACEs training and recognition training to our workers in this field? Because I think it's particularly important. The answer, yes. Okay,
yes, it is. Yeah. We have done ACEs training, and we also there's currently Bernardo's as part of the violence reduction network work that we're involved in. We're also rolling out trauma-informed practice, which there's a link with ACEs.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, great. That's really good news. I think that's something that's just so vitally important. Children get so often, they get overlooked. They think, okay, now they're removed from the harm. They don't realize the long-lasting, lifelong effects. That's always so. Okay, thank you very much for that. And just another quick question, if I may, and that's to do with the governance structure. So I looked at I got, if you can, please, and I realize it's early days, the LLR Domestic Abuse Task and Finish Group. I'm a little unsure what they're tasking and finishing at this point. And then the LLR Data Group, I'm guessing that is to do with trying to determine these hidden victims, and particularly those with protected characteristics.
So
and then I had no idea what JAG was, so I'm sorry.
Oh, that's the joint area group. That's so in terms of the LLR groups, there's something called the Vulnerability Executive, which is across LLR. It's chaired by, I have to get it right because I've been to the Violence Reduction Network today. So it's the Vulnerability Exec is chaired by David Sandel, who's the Assistant Chief Constable. So obviously, clearly the police are around the table. The Police and Crime Commissioner office is there too. All the local authorities are represented, as well as all of our health partners, probation, community safety, etc., and the voluntary. That strategic vulnerability exec has domestic abuse within its remit, and that's looking at the system level response to domestic abuse across the LLR footprint. The LLR Domestic Abuse Task and Finish Group sits underneath that, and they're the people who are tasked to, for example, they do the analysis of the data. They will look at hotspots. Operation Encompass is something that's being rolled out across the footprint, which is it's a police initiative. I think we're quite late to the party on this, because I knew about this has been going on in London for at least 15 years, but it is now rolling out across the footprint of LLR. And the Operation Encompass is about when police get notifications or they get a call out of a domestic abuse incident. They see that there's a child at that address, whether they're physically at the address or not, or lives at that address, even if the child's somewhere else at the time of the incident. They mark it, and then if it's a school-age child, they will contact that school and let the safeguarding lead for that school know that they've had a call out the night before or over the weekend if it's a Monday, so that the school can be aware that that child may be traumatized, may be, you know, may need some extra support, but it also helps them kind of make sure so they can support the child on that day, but also it's about having that kind of joined up kind of response both to the child but also to the parent. So it's it's a really good initiative actually. So that's the sort of work that the LLR, Domestic Abuse Task and Finish Group, would be responsible for, as an example.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, I mean, I think the duty of care that policemen have to or enjoy is just immense. I don't know where their duty of care stops and where dealing with criminal activity starts. Actually, it's just amazing the amount of work they have to put in as a duty of care, and particularly with youngsters, children. And Jag, you mentioned that briefly in passing.
It's the joint area group, and I've got a feeling that that might be an old. I think we're disbanded. I think we've disbanded that because I think that's disbanded. I'm not sure.
I thought it was, and I was just wondering whether that's been superseded.
So I think that might be a typo because I don't think that's
Okay.
happening anymore. But Jane's put her hand up, so maybe she.
Oh, Jane, if you'd like to come in, you're on mute, Jane. Hooray!
Yeah, I know. JAG, it's the Joint Action Group. It's
Yes.
chaired by the housing manager. And as far as I know, it's still ongoing. It's held every month.
Chaired by the housing manager. That's interesting.
That's Alison, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that something
I'm
we can
sure.
come back to us later on, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely.
For the minutes. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for that intervention, Jane. We'll get clarification outside of the meeting, I think. So are there any further? Sorry, I've got another question, actually. I've just got to find it. No, I think that was it. I was particularly interested in that's it. Thank you very much. So are there any, does anybody have any other further questions for this agenda item? No, in which case, just turn to the correct page and we will, here we go. So sorry about that. So decisions and recommendations then, we'll draw this to a close. That the committee notes the report which features the outcomes of the needs assessment and gives regards to the new duties placed upon a local authority following an introduction of the Domestic Abuse Act 2021 and endorses the Domestic Abuse Strategy 21 to 24. Could I have a quick show of hands for that, please, that we endorse the strategy? Juna? Oh, yes, I can. I think that's everybody. Yep, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, everybody. So thank you very much, Councillor Wilby and Dawn Godfrey. I think if you're happy, you can step away at this point. We've got to go into more domestic matters regarding the review of our annual work plan and any other urgent business, unless you'd like, of course, to participate in that discussion. Oh, the key performance indicators.
I just wanted
yes.
to, before I did disappear, I wanted to check whether there was any questions
Yes.
on the
Thank you for that.
performance report.
Do we have any questions?
Can I just give you, Chair, a quick tour
Please.
across the board?
Yes, of
Dawn
course.
has given you all the granularity and the data, but just to say that since September, all our schools and nurseries are the unsung heroes. I have to say, we have had more disruption because of the pandemic than at any other time during the last couple of years. It's been humongous. If I tell you that on one day, Uppingham School, not Uppingham County, but Uppingham School, had something like 103 pupils and 23 staff off. And all our schools and all our nurseries, without exception, have had bouts of teachers off, children off. So you can imagine the amount of difficulty our heads and principals have had trying to keep their schools going, and I think they've done a first-class job on that. In terms of that, on the early years, I chaired the early years group of folk who look after nurseries and childminders and things like that, and they have been working hard, and I know that most of them are really on the cusp of difficulty in terms of finances. The minimum wage going up has not helped things, and of course government promises so much free time to parents have made life quite difficult. They're a pretty happy, resilient bunch, but I know that we will need to join with East Midlands colleagues and continue to raise the problem of finances as we go up to government and the Department of the Environment. In terms of, I can't tell you this because it's confidential until the 1st of March when the offer day comes, but I can tell you that we have got 97% of our children get their first choice on the 1st of March. There are only 2 children who we can't find places for. One of them was a very late submission, and the other one wants a place out of county. And I'm sure that by the time we get round to the second offer, etc., all those will be taken up. But all our secondary schools are full. They've got all the places that they need. And Julie Brown has done a wonderful job, as always, in just keeping that ongoing. I also chaired the Education Performance Board this week, and one of the things that came out, not unexpectedly because of the pandemic and the frustration and everything else, some of the behaviours in the secondary school children not as sharp as it might be, but I guess that's a fallout of the problem that we've been facing right the way across the board. The CAPMUS extension is ongoing. The initial move by Brightways to Rowles has gone pretty well. I sat in with some of them earlier last week, I think it was last week, where they are working in their new accommodation there, and they seem pretty happy. And I was delighted to meet one young lady who was hoping to get an employment slot in. And I'm sure that if we put our minds together, we can find work in the sort of council, whether it's a museum or the various things that we've got, which will keep, people who want to work and have shown that they're capable of it, then I think that would be really good for us to do it. The Ofsted, you will have heard that the children's services were Ofsteded. We've just had the letter through. I think we'll probably be pushing that out fairly shortly for everyone to have a look, but it was a very positive outcome. There's been a lot of work by Dawn's team to improve the performance across the board. They raised a few points which still need some attention, but we've got a positive move where what I want to see now is time for the outfit to settle a little bit. We've had quite a few moves and things like that, and it just needs a little time to consolidate and sustain the good performance that we've got and to keep everything moving forward. UASCs, we now have 7 of those. So again, I was at one of the activities for a day which worked really well for a change. The weather was quite on our side, and there were at least 6 of the 7 there. There was an interpreter. It's quite difficult when you set these things up because you need an interpreter to be able to speak. Some of them speak very good English and others just need a little bit of a help. But I thought it was very well orchestrated, and I'm hoping to, well, I'm not hoping, we will get one of them on a virtual chat at least at the next corporate board, and they're looking really good. So overall, we're moving gently in the right direction.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much for that, Councillor
I can
Wilby.
take any questions if you.
Yeah, I was going to say, are there any questions from the floor? No, it doesn't. Well, thank you for that tour de rise, to steal your phrase.
Sorry,
There are a
Chair,
couple of questions.
Councillors Brown and Webb have got their hands up.
I don't know how I missed that. So sorry, everybody. Who was first? According to my book, it's Councillor Brown, Andrew Brown first. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. I see that there's a £250,000 underspend for the year. I mean, it must be almost impossible to predict and budget, because if you get a family of 5 or something like that come in and they all need to be looked after, that could easily hoover up a large amount, if not more than that. Do we ring fence any money for that scenario, or should we ring fence money for that scenario?
Yeah, so in terms of that underspend, it does show as an underspend. So what we're not doing is removing it from the budget for the very reason you've just articulated, because it's such a volatile area. It's a volatile budget because, as you're well aware, it's a demand-led budget. So clearly, if a large family of children came into our care, then you know that underspend would be significantly reduced. What I would say is the work that we're doing in the early help arena is about trying to prevent children coming into our care, and that's where we've been quite. So you may remember, so when I came in 2019, we had more children in care, and by the end of 2019, going into the beginning of 2020, our children in care numbers had gone up to around 42, I think, at the high. The reason for that was twofold. One was the children were staying in our care for too long. So we weren't moving them into permanent homes, whether that through adoption or special guardianship. We were just letting them stay in our care for too long. The other reason was because there was because more children were coming into our care who hadn't had support at an early enough stage. So we've had a kind of, so that since then, over the last 18 months, we've really focused on making sure that as soon as a child comes into our care, we actually start planning for them to leave our care. And I don't mean at 18, I mean, within the next 6 to 12 months, in terms of making sure that they return either to their family safely or into a permanent alternative care, permanent family. And then the other element is around making sure that our early help is that we have an edge of care offer, so to speak, so that we work with, and this is particularly important when children are older. So it's more thinking, those kind of early teenage years, usually when things may be more difficult for parents at home, or some of the behaviours become more difficult for them to manage. It's about getting in there as soon as that starts bubbling up to prevent it from escalating and them needing our care. And that's where we've also had some success. So that's how we're keeping our looked after figures stable. But you're absolutely right. If a child, if tomorrow a referral comes in and actually it's a significant safeguarding risk for children, then they would come into our care, and therefore our numbers would increase. But that's the approach that we're taking.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Brown? Thank you very much indeed. So Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Wilby, you mentioned class sizes, that we placed all the children in bar 2 into schools that they wanted to be. I just wondered what those class sizes are at the moment, or what the average.
Sorry, I missed exactly what you said.
Oh, sorry. You mentioned that bar 2 children, all children were
Yeah.
in schools where they wanted to go, and that there wasn't an issue with capacity within the school. So I was just asking what class size are we talking about now?
You want me to come in?
It wasn't so much that the children could not be accommodated in, they couldn't be accommodated in their first choice of school, and the reasons that those two weren't accommodated on their first pass was because one was a very late application, and the second one was because they were trying to get in and out of school, out of county school.
No, sorry, Councillor. I'm wording it wrong. I'm just really curious to know what size classes are now.
Do you mean? I mean, it will depend on the school.
Yes.
Because clearly we've got some very small schools with very small class numbers. Do you mean secondary, for example?
I probably do. Yes.
I was thinking where
it's tougher, basically. There's dealing with more children.
The class sizes, well, let me tell you what the year intake is for each of them. For Casterton, it's 180, I think, for it's 180 for Casterton, 210 for no, let me get that right. It's 180 for Uppingham, 210 for Casterton, and 240 for Catmos, and that is keeping the class sizes the same. I can't give you an answer at the moment on what each class size is, I'm afraid. Okay. I can get that information to you.
Yeah, I think across the 3 secondary schools, the year groups, if I do it by year group, because again, some classes will have more than others depending on which year they're in, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But they're all between 25 and 30. But okay. I can ask Jill Curtis, my head of learning and skills, to kind of get some more detail if you'd like that.
Please, there's not too much trouble. That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Yeah, are there any further questions regarding the Q3 performance item 10? Okay, so I think we'll close that item, and I'd like to thank Councillor Wilby and Dawn Godfrey for their participation. And if you wish to leave at this point, then please do so. And of course, if you wish to stay while we discuss the forward plan and the annual work plan, you're welcome to do so.
I will
Chair,
let you enjoy the rest of the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Okay. Thank you all. We'll move on to looking at the annual work plan. Does anybody have any items they wish to include into the annual work plan? It obviously only takes us to the end of the corporate year. No. I would like to suggest an amendment to the work plan in that we have had considerable interest in the send service update and review. So I'm looking to actually make that item 1 on the agenda and item 2 to be the children's services update. We're hoping to bring in several representatives from the community to actually discuss the send offer. And I think that's going to be particularly advantageous. So unless there's any serious objections, that's what we'll do. And we'll drop item 3, provision of speech and language services. Is everybody happy with that approach? Thank you very much indeed. And what I'd like to do is to get your thinking heads on. Of course, everything changes at the end of the municipal year, but then if you get your thinking heads on as what areas you think that we might need to investigate, by all means, drop me an email or my deputy, Councillor Webb, and we'll collate and then we'll come back to you with a plan, should we still be in post, of course. Okay, thank you, everybody. Is there any other business? Okay, the date of the next meeting is on the 21st of April. And as we've already just discussed, we're going to be looking at the SEND services and children's services update and dropping item 3. We'll of course keep the Q4 KPI data in there. And I think that was welcome from Councillor Wilby to actually give us an update right across the board. And that's something I think we'll look to keep in, unless anybody find that useful. Because we hadn't done that before. So I think we'll encourage him to do that again. So without further ado, I'd like to thank you all for coming and for your participation. If there's nothing else, we'll close the meeting. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye. Yeah. Jane, thank you very much indeed.